I did over $150,000 in revenue in May 2022, and then over $130,000 in revenue in June 2022. Anyone who succeeds in anything anywhere, I would say it's a large combination of luck and preparation. Trying to look ahead and look at trends and see what can I do first.
What's up, beautiful people? Jay here from Jay's Way, and today I have a very special guest. I had the luxury and privilege, I'll say, of meeting Sarah Blair out in Riga, Latvia at PRINTIFY HQ for their Amplified Summit. How's it going, Sarah?
Hey, great, Jay. Thanks for having me. How are you?
Well, thank you so much for being a part of this. So Talish mentioned you were on one of the panels there, and starting from the bottom, I believe it was?
That's right.
Talish mentioned in there that you were a PRINTIFY power seller. So maybe tell us a little bit about who Sarah is and how you went from doing whatever it was you were doing to what PRINTIFY called a power seller, because those are some pretty big words, right?
Yes, yeah. I don't know exactly what constitutes a power seller in PRINTIFY's mind, but I'm honored to be one of their deemed power sellers. So I sort of, like many people, I sort of fell into doing print on demand. It was not something I ever had heard of before the fall of 2020, but I sort of came into it out of necessity. I've had a history of some pretty serious health challenges. Made it really difficult for me to just live the normal working life and support myself as an adult. So I had been in grad school from 2018 to 2020, and that was going okay, but then my health took another major dive. And so I had for a long time really wanted to start my own business, but I had never found anything that felt like it would have really just the right blend of something I would like and that would use my talents in a way that I felt I could really succeed at it. So when I had this major health dive again and basically had to drop out of grad school, that's when I finally decided, okay, I am going to have to make this work. I need to find a way to work for myself so that I have the flexibility to work around this. And so I started I'd done so much research in the past, but somehow this time, I guess, right, the stars aligned, and I, through YouTube or wherever it was, discovered print on demand. And it was initially presented to me through the selling on Etsy angle. And so that's what I've done ever since. And so realizing I've always really loved art and design, and realizing that I could take these skills, and there's a very low barrier of entry, which was great. At the time I was, not really able to put too much time, certainly, or too much money into it. So
Sure.
It seemed like a very low risk venture where I could just try doing what I loved, being creative, put it out there for low or no cost and see what happened. So that's what I did. I opened an Etsy shop. I believe it was the next day after I discovered that this was a thing. And I started out selling mugs, and I was just sort of all over the place with my designs. I would say the majority of people who start out are just throwing everything against the wall, seeing what happens. I started out just using Canva, using the graphics, and no niche, doing whatever kind of came to mind. It was honestly probably worse than most people, completely all over the place. But I was very lucky timing in that it was November of 2020. So I did, despite being so scattered, I managed to get a few early sales because obviously with the pandemic, that was the biggest year ever for online holiday shopping. So if not for that, I don't know if I would have gotten the positive reinforcement I needed to keep going. But fortunately I did. So I got enough sales in November and December. I think I did $1,700 in revenue or something that year. So not much, but enough that I was this is a viable business idea. I could grow this. So yes, and that was all mugs. And after, obviously in January, sales went down because it was no longer Q4. And that's when I started realizing, okay, I've played around with this. I see that it can work, but now is really the time to get strategic with this. Because for one thing, it's really all about, I see so many people, especially asking for shop critiques, in the PRINTIFY Facebook group or in your Facebook group, where they're doing exactly what I was doing. No niche, no real strategy. And I think people end up wasting a lot of time that way. I know I certainly did. So fortunately, it only took me a couple months to realize I needed to zero in on a niche and, what products I wanted to offer. So I did a lot of fine tuning, and I pretty quickly found that my designs sold better on t-shirts. Even at the time, everyone was saying t-shirts were too saturated, but people are always buying t-shirts. That's for whatever reason, I think my designs just happen to work best on apparel. So I switched to that. I found a niche that for me was was not only a niche that I was knowledgeable and passionate about, but also one that, because I knew that space, I could tell that it had room to grow. So based on what was currently on offer on Etsy, especially at the time, it was mostly, at least in the t-shirt space, which was what I, had pretty much entirely switched to by January or February of 2021.
Okay.
People were mostly selling in this niche.
So just to recap, you wrote out Q4 with the mugs, and then as soon as January hit, you were like, okay, it all dived, and now you decided to explore t-shirts?
Exactly,
Okay.
yeah. And I kept offering mugs for a while, but pretty soon I was selling so many more t-shirts than mugs. And with the shipping, the mugs, the breakage that people would get, it just became more trouble than it was worth to sell mugs. I mean, I know a lot of people do very well with mugs, but for me, it just wasn't where, it was more worth it to me to invest more in apparel, designing different kinds of apparel, etc.
I couldn't agree more. It's not that, the mugs aren't, sure, it's like 1 in 300 or something that arrives broken or something like that, but it's also just, it's just a logistic kind of element to the headache that you don't need to add. I felt the same about mugs. You can do well, but I just felt it to be a little bit of a headache, and something with, sublimation alone on a ceramic, you get that ghosting on the edges and stuff, and it doesn't always look awesome, right? I totally agree. To me, t-shirts was like a no-brainer because I had been doing them since I was a kid, but in some capacity, but also it's like the longevity of something, right? Like t-shirts are never going to go out of style, at least not in our lifetime.
Definitely. And there really is something also about just selling heavy items versus selling light items. It's pretty cheap to ship a t-shirt, but it will always, even if you ship them yourself, it will always be expensive to ship something as heavy as a mug, especially because it needs a certain amount of packaging, it needs a rigid box. And I think that is something that is worth keeping in mind for any product offerings. Some of them, if you're selling rugs or even something like pillows, like they can sell well, but it's always going to be harder to sell those online versus in person because the shipping is always going to be a big cost.
Yeah, and even if you're trying to work in a lower shipping point and roll some of that into the cost of your item, then all of a sudden your price points are a little too inflated maybe for what the market will bear. And yeah, it's valid.
Definitely. Yeah, I was pretty much by, a few months in really focusing on t-shirts and said, okay, this is what I'm going to go with. And so I was looking at what other people were offering in the niche I had decided on, and it was really mostly at the time just a lot of plain black and white text phrases. And so I figured, okay, I believed at the time, and I still firmly believe, the most important thing, and we've talked about this in the past, is standing out on Etsy, especially now more than ever. Everything's even more saturated now than it was in 2020 when I started. But I went into this design space thinking about, okay, what can I do that's going to stand out? What's going to make someone click on my listing from the Etsy search? And the entire time, I've gotten 99% of my sales just organically through Etsy search. I rarely run ads. Sometimes I'll do it here and there, but I usually don't. And I don't really direct any of my own traffic. So my strategy has been going hard on what will someone search for, see my product, click on it, and feel that they have to have it. So I really focused on having designs that used more ornamental fonts and in brighter colors. And I started making my own graphics. I switched from Canva I use Affinity Photo and Designer. I got them for, I think, $35 a piece on Black Friday sale. So, that.
And you were using the Adobe stuff before?
I had used Adobe in the past, but I never really mastered it. And so I like that Affinity is very user-friendly.
Awesome.
And, just pretty simple. I actually would highly recommend the Affinity suite to anybody who's looking for a program that's affordable, and it pretty much does it doesn't do everything that Adobe does, but it pretty much does 90% of it.
And it's a one and done, right? Like you buy it, it's not a monthly subscription?
Yeah, there's no recurring fee, which is great.
Awesome. Okay, good to know.
Yeah, I don't know if they'll do a Black Friday sale this year, but if they do, it's, probably worth looking into for anyone looking at a program.
So you ended up making some dark, I guess, designs. If they were like, it seems like it's a darker niche. If it was black with white text, you ended up adding some color to it, is what you were saying?
Yeah, I wouldn't say the niche itself is like dark themed, but yeah, that's just like stylistically what was sort of out there, or black with white text or white with black text, right? Yeah, I really wanted to make designs that were colorful and eye-catching. So so I started making my designs from scratch, but I kept them simple because, we've all, well, those of us who make our own designs, I'm sure you can relate to this, Jay. Sometimes you'll spend 20 hours on a design that you think is beautiful, but then you sell 2 of them ever. So I found pretty quickly it was worth my while to keep the design simple. That actually seems to sell better on Etsy in general. It appeals to a wider range of people, the simpler it is. So I do simple designs, but I try to really make them eye-catching and have them aesthetically tie in well to the text and, maybe be related to what is saying. And so that's kind of been my strategy. And I use eRank for keyword research. And so, within the niche I settled on, I did a lot of research on what was already selling well on Etsy, different slogans and ideas and this and that. But with my own very different design style brought into it. And I think that's really key for people is things that are selling well, but what can you do that's a different twist on that will make people...
We were talking about that just before we went live here on the recording, right? It was like, how to stand out. We were talking, for you guys didn't know, behind the scenes, we were actually talking about the viability of Etsy as a platform long term in terms of profitability. One thing we agreed on almost immediately, the two of us for sure, was that we didn't have any plans to stop selling on Etsy for the foreseeable future, right? It's like, one of those things that we just were in for the long haul, and I don't see it being an issue for us per se, but what we did mention was that, or I mentioned anyway, that I felt like it was potentially a little bit harder to stand out, but the thing is that most people don't realize that I think you need to stand out in terms of the design. That is number one. Like, one thing that we didn't actually chat about was that I feel like sometimes people just put too much stock into SEO. We talk about eRank and like Everbee and the other tools and stuff, and I think they're great if you already know what kind of data you're looking for, but you have to kind of know how to stand out within the niche or niches you're in, I think. And if you look at your stats, for example, like you can see where Etsy search is, right? What portion of or percentage of your sales are coming from the actual Etsy search. And it's, for me, like less than 20% typically, right? So like all the SEO in the world is going to get your listing in front of people's eyes, sure, but if your design is crap, it's not going to make it sell. Conversely, if your design is awesome and your SEO is terrible, but it catches the right eye, you can still convert, make a sale, right? Do you have any thoughts on that? Like, I know we were talking about like standing out. So do you have like a way to stand out that way?
Well, I definitely agree with that. I think SEO is super important, but in that it will get you the views. But yeah, that's definitely not nearly enough. And I think a lot of people end up wasting a lot of money on Etsy ads for that same reason. They can, even if the SEO is dialed in and they're driving all sorts of traffic, if their design isn't something people want to buy, it's not, they're just going to be throwing their money away. But yeah, I think that, especially with new sellers, I feel like I see the same things over and over. One is a really cute mock-up that really complements your design and appeals to your target market can really make you stand out, even if you have a pretty basic design. If it's on a really well-styled mock-up, I think that's something that people tend to underestimate the importance of when they start out. So that's a big part of it. And also, I think that something will start selling well, and then you'll see immediately dozens of people trying to mimic that design almost exactly. And you can really just make, assuming this is something that's public domain, you're not just going in and copying someone's original idea, but say there's like already existing phrase or something that starts trending that doesn't belong to anyone, and it's fair game. There is some pretty small, maybe you can do the same thing everyone's doing, but just add text or add color to the text, or, maybe add a small graphic. A really small tweak sometimes can be the thing that would make people choose your design over the sea of similar looking designs when, if they're coming to it, especially through Etsy search.
Smart. I like playing around with text. I've always been, the kid that likes to draw letters. I've been told I don't write, I draw my letters. I think that just was a nice way of stroking my ego by not saying that my handwriting was terrible. But, it was chicken scratch for sure. But yeah, I like playing around with text, and you can shape text, right? You can do things to create designs with text. They don't just have to be words on a shirt in a static kind of straight line or anything like that. And to your point, like font choices matter, color can make or break a sale for sure. I think, yeah, that's great. I want to go back before we get too far away, like PRINTIFY Power Seller. So I'm sorry if you were trying to like just fly under the radar there, but I want to call this out. So what were your numbers looking like when you hit the next Q4 now? Like, so you're going like full throttle t-shirts, you're bringing something new to an already existing kind of niche or aesthetic. You're putting your own spin on it, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. And then how did that progress then? So like, we're talking like July, August, September. September now. You know what's coming. You know Q4 is coming. What did you do to prep, and what got you where you were at?
Well, so I will say, if you look at like my stats for my first year of selling, they're a little different than most people's. They were pretty mediocre until I think it was April. I started really seeing enough traction that I was really getting daily sales, and it was something. It wasn't enough to live off, but it was consistent money. It was in side hustle territory probably at that point. And then summer was all right, I guess, starting to build a little bit, but then actually in September, I had a handful of designs because of my niche. This is where I knew my niche had room to grow. There was it just kind of became something that was more in the public eye. And so I had a few designs go extremely viral. And all of a sudden, I think I did about $60,000 in revenue in September alone. So it was completely like, this is one of the things that I love actually about selling print on demand and being in this world. You never know when something like that's going to happen. Just out of the blue one day, and it feels kind of like winning the lottery. It's like a nice dopamine
100%.
boost. Like just all of a sudden, you can just, your sales can be flagging, you're starting to despair, and then just it can be one design and suddenly you're back on top of your game. And so that's really, I had already been feeling like, yes, this is working. I'm making money off of this. But that was a moment where I was like, okay, this is like, it's game on. So September was my best month of the year because, they started really, as often happens on Etsy, I was sort of the only one doing that in that niche. And so then other people started to catch on and start doing the same thing. So I think it was hard you can't say that on top forever, right? That's sort of the name of the game with Etsy. You need to constantly be pivoting or always be looking at what's next. And which is actually something I like about it. It keeps you engaged. It keeps things fresh. But because of that, I had not been expecting that at all because it wasn't Q4 yet. There was no way to predict that this was going to happen. So that was great. And, I was very, very happy about it. But then Q4 was actually, it was decent, but it was nothing compared to September. So it almost, which honestly was probably a good thing because the supply chain issues were still very bad in 2021. So out of stock items, major delays, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm kind of glad I wasn't keeping up that $60,000 a month revenue into all of that because it would have been quite a lot to deal with that year.
And super deflating, right? Like what come January, like if you're not there, like, I mean, was it super deflating come October and you're like, oh, the sales dipped? Or did you kind of realize that, the virality of that one design was an outlier? Did you recognize that at the time or?
Yes, I knew it wasn't going to stay at that level.
Okay,
and
so you had that kind of.
Yeah, and I'm an optimist, so I figured, my sales in October were still well above what they'd been August.
Sure.
So, it was good enough. I was still making enough money that I was like, okay, this is my full-time job now. This is great. So I find it's really important. I think people don't talk about the mental game as much as they could when it comes to selling print on demand, but you really do have to keep the attitude of looking at the positive and focusing on the things that are in your control. Like, so for me, that was, okay, these few designs went viral, now that's flagging. I was still selling them, but it wasn't at that level. But okay, so, one of the biggest things that is generally recommended that people do selling print on demand is if something's working, okay, do more of that, right? So I was like, okay, these designs are selling well. What similar designs can I make? What was it about this style? Was it this font? Was it these colors? Was it, that made my designs over other people who had maybe a similar phrase? Mm-hmm. Like, why did my design stand out? Was it my mock-ups? So it gave me a lot. I tried to focus on looking at it as a puzzle and like, how can I continue this?
Yeah, you're trying to identify like what the elements of that recipe that kind of are working, right? And trying to replicate it a little bit different maybe.
Exactly. And if you look at it as kind of an interesting puzzle like that, rather than, so even then like, okay, if sales start slowing down, well, okay, again, it's a puzzle. Let's figure this out. And then you can kind of, for me, that prevents it from becoming deflating. Yeah.
That's a smart, logical, rational way to look at it, right? So that's, I can't say the same for most people though, right? Everybody gets caught up and swept up, and like that's the other thing. Like, and you've seen it in my group and whatever groups you're a part of too. I'm sure the Rockstars group too. But it's like that whole idea that October 1st, fourth quarter is here. Where's the sales? We're 10 days in. We're 12 days in. Where's the sales? Well, that's the thing. So like, I guess a big part of the whole thing for me is that like if you're going to go into a fourth quarter and expect any kind of sales, then I think you're setting yourself up for massive, massive heartache and failure. right? Like there's
Definitely.
with the peaks like you had come the valleys. Like that's just inevitable. The only reason we know the good as we know it is because we've got an equal or worse bad to compare it to, I think, right? So if everything was always good, it would just end up being our baseline, and then you wouldn't appreciate those moments either. I think to your point, the mental game, the headspace thing is a major point that I'm glad I'm glad you brought that up, because I don't think it's talked about enough.
Yeah, and I think that's a very good point too. There will always just selling e-commerce is, tends to inevitably have peaks and valleys. And so there is an advantage to that of allowing you to appreciate the peaks. And then the valleys can be kind of a restful time, recoup, retool your strategy, maybe take a vacation, travel a little, yeah, get some sleep, right? So, yeah, so anyway, to go back to the sort of time frame, I wound up becoming a six-figure seller within my first year, thanks mostly, obviously, to that September being so strong. But that was very encouraging to me. So even though, things, had flagged a bit, I felt like I was, succeeding at that point. So I kept doing more of what I was doing. And then that next May, sort of the same thing happened. So this was May of 2022. My niche became more in the public eye again, and I had a few designs go even more viral. Some of them were actually the same designs, I think.
That's pretty crazy. So you thought what you had was a one-off with a viral design or two within your niche, but then you replicated that success. So, okay, is there a moment when you thought you made it? Was it that previous September, or is it this May now when you've repeated that unique or that unicorn success? Because if you're doing it a second time, could be coincidence, but if you're able to do it a third time, then there's a pattern forming, right? Like
definitely. I would say in that September, I felt I had a tenuous sense of success where, I didn't know if it was going to continue, and it was so out of the blue to me. I was like, well, this is great, but I'm not,
skeptical.
This is all very new. I don't really know what's happening. But May came around and blew September out of the water. So
no way.
I just checked. I did over $150,000 in revenue in May 2022, and then over $130,000 in revenue in June 2022. So that was, and again, that's not like a typical month for me. It's like I do fine on Etsy, but I'm not doing $100,000 every single month in revenue or anything.
But you had almost 300 grand in 2 months. That I think would qualify you as, or quantify as, a Printify power seller, just for the record.
I think that's I think I had my success manager at Printify. So for those who don't know, if you sell a certain volume on Printify, they'll set you up with a success manager, which is basically a liaison who helps you work with Printify. And that's one of the things that I really like. I actually only sell through Printify right now, and that's one of the things I like about them a lot. They're really strong rapport they build with their sellers, their merchants. So he told me, I think that was, I sell mostly the Bella Canvas 3001, and he said I think it was like the most Bella Canvas he'd ever seen sold within a month or something like that. So wow. I think that's what they're referring to. But
you think
again, it was well.
Take the pat on the back. You deserve it. Those are crazy numbers.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. But, yeah, and I haven't had a month like that since. I mean, nor could I, honestly, would I want to. I was barely eating or sleeping those 2 months. I was getting, just because of all the orders, I was getting like 30 or 40 messages every day. And, this package was returned to sender due to a wrong address. Just the inevitable logistical things you're going to deal with. It was way too much. And I was not set up to hire an employee at all. Like, everything was just in my head, how it worked. I wouldn't have had time to train someone. So, there is like, I think, a happy medium of like good sales, but not through the roof.
So
it's not really sustainable.
Is there a lesson learned there for next time? Do you have somebody part-time helping now, or do you, would you entertain that?
I did get my cousin, she offered, I did get her to help me answer messages for a while, and that was helpful. So now that's kind of in the bag if Perfect. I were to need that again, like I've already, and I would definitely recommend that people, think about what will happen if you do have a design go viral, or, what can you do to streamline the process, both to make your regular day-to-day faster, but also, in case sales do really take off, how are you going to handle all of that? And I think, it's good to be optimistic and have a plan for when you succeed, right?
Yeah, because I hate to hear you say, in not so many words, but that you're grateful that you didn't didn't have a third month of that caliber, right? Like, you never want to be in that situation ultimately, but I understand it. These are good problems to have, but they can be stressful problems at the same time.
Yeah, definitely. They are. And I was very happy to be having those problems, but it was, if I had had any idea that was going to happen, I would have set things up a lot differently for myself. But basically what happened then, to be honest, is I had a day where I was the top, according to E-Rank at least, where I was the top selling shop on all of Etsy. And that was sort of, it gave me like a pit in my stomach because I was like, okay, now my shop is on all my competitors' radar. And, you know, that is something that can't really talk about selling on Etsy without addressing, is the extreme amount of competition and how many people will copy your designs when you're successful. So that's why I think another really important part of the mental game and just strategy in general, in my opinion, is to not get too attached to any particular design, even if it's your best seller, because people will come in and copy that idea and they will start funneling off your sales. And once 100 people have done it, your sales are almost certainly going to have gone way down on that design. So yes. And so instead of dwelling on that and being angry about it or bitter, keep making more designs. Again, keep thinking, what about that design worked? What can I do to have another one of those designs? So it's all about getting in on things first, I think. And I think that's kind of a fundamental thing for me. If I had to give like one tip to people who want to find a way in on Etsy, like, you know, they're not really sure how to like break through. I think trying to look ahead and look at trends and see, what can I do first? For instance, one thing that I kind of kick myself for is I'm just now giving in and starting to sell Comfort Colors shirts, because when I started selling in 2020,
I'm almost there. I know.
Right. Okay. So you can relate. Yeah. So when I started selling, the Bella Canvas 3001 was the it t-shirt. That's the one everyone wanted. I loved it. I love Bella Canvas's great like labor practices, environmental practices. So I felt very attached to selling that shirt. Didn't want to change. Comfort Colors came in. Suddenly everyone was talking about it. Printify started carrying it. And I was like, well, this is just a Gen Z fad. You know, it'll go away any day now. But it's not. It seems more in demand than ever right now. So you gotta keep rolling with the market. But so if someone, even in an extremely saturated niche, once Comfort Colors became available for print on demand and widely available, people getting in there, whatever the niche, if they started selling them on Comfort Colors before anybody else, huge opportunity for profit. So who knows what the next Comfort Colors shirt will be? Who knows what the next it design will be? So keeping on top of that kind of thing, I think stylistic trends over time, what products people are wanting over time, that will always be changing. So being just aware of that space and not afraid to dive in before most people are doing it, I think is the biggest opportunity for people who are just starting out to really get established.
Yeah, I like what you're saying there, because like we see it all the time in the groups and in the communities and stuff, and it's like, I'm doing evergreen. Oh, well, that's great, but understand that, you know, an evergreen design, which by definition evergreen is just something that stays green theoretically year round, which means you can make money year round. Think of your, you know, the evergreen trees literally outside, right? They stay kind of relevant all year round. Great place to be, you know, for constant sales. It kind of mitigates some of those valleys we were talking about earlier. But understand, please, everybody out there, that even evergreen designs can have a shelf life. They will expire almost inevitably at some point or another. If you have one that goes 3-4 years, consider yourself lucky, right? Ultimately, it's on you. You're running a business here, so it's on you to stay abreast of, you know, what Sarah touched on, like the trends within the niche, the color palettes, aesthetics. Like, what can you do to pay attention? Or in this case, the Comfort Colors, for example, like the new products that are hot within that niche or that aesthetic, right? Because everybody wants the oversized vintage look and feel now, right? So what was once my staple, the Gildan 5000, went to the Bella for everybody else. I still prefer to sell the 64,000 just because it's more forgiving in terms of body size and shape for my particular niche. But everyone hated the Gildan 5000 like 2 years ago because they thought it was itchy and scratchy and hard. It was like sandpaper, blah, blah, blah. But the Comfort Colors, I mean, depends on how you wash it, but it's a very robust t-shirt also. And it's nowhere near as soft to the touch as the Bella, for example, right? So it's kind of funny how things, you know, kind of shift, right? Nobody cares about how it feels. They just like the look of the vintage wash kind of thing now, right? So yeah, I think understanding that any marketplace for starters is going to evolve, so there's no set it and forget it button. That's one thing I want everyone to know too, is that if you're waiting for that opportune, the perfect moment to launch your store, that perfect listing, like just don't, because you'll never kind of jump in the water that way. You'll always be dipping your toe and not sure, but you got to just jump in at some point, because nothing has to be as permanent as it feels, right? You can always make changes and adapt, and you're going to want to anyway if you're going to be doing any kind of good business, right? Yeah, it's heartbreaking sometimes, because this time of year, you see everybody in June, July, okay, well, Q4 is coming. I got 3 months, 4 months to get as many listings up as I can, but you're throwing pieces of crap at the wall hoping something sticks is not a strategy for me, right? Like, and that's kind of, I mean, to your point, that's exactly what you tried to do, right? And I did too, my very first general store. And how did it bode for you? You had some sales in Q4, but you had to make some pretty big changes, right?
Definitely, yeah. And I think, it's somewhat unavoidable to go through that process a bit. Like, I think it's good to experiment, right, before you dial in what's going to work for you. No one's going to get it right on the first try. But at the same time, yeah, you have to think about, okay, am I just wasting time at this point? Like, at some point, you have to pick what you're going to focus on and maybe get good at one design style. Decide what product sells best for you. And of course, a solid niche. So yeah, definitely. I think you can just spin your wheels quite a lot being all over the place.
So that said, like, what would you consider the worst parts of print on demand and the best parts? Like, we've seen some of, I think what your best parts is the idea that things can go viral, but is there things outside of actual selling print on demand that you love or loathe about the industry at all? Like the freedom to do kind of what you want, where you want sort of thing, versus like maybe feeling like, I don't know, like what are the negatives too that you would want people to know before jumping right in, I guess?
I would say definitely, to start with the positives, the freedom is for sure a huge part of it. And just a sense of empowerment that comes from knowing that you're in charge of your fate. I don't want to say being your own boss, but just knowing that your actions can, if you say you work a salaried job, you can work really hard, you can slack off, you're making the same amount of money. People may or may not even notice. But when it's you are accountable completely to yourself and you are completely in charge of your own fate and responsible for your own fate, it's something very empowering and enlivening about that, I think.
I was just going to say, especially when you have a few wins under your belt, right? Like you can also take all of that credit, which is an undescribable feeling too, right? Especially in your situation where health sidelined you for multiple times for a significant amount of time, it sounds like. So to be able to take control of your life in a way that would otherwise have just had somebody kind of sitting at home, worrying about what's next, right?
Yeah, that's been huge for me. For me personally, that really has been the best part, is finding a way to work around these challenges and, have a stable income, where before that was so elusive to me. But though there was something you said where, being able to take all the credit for designs going viral or whatever, I will say, of course, a huge part of it is luck, right? But I think that's true. Anyone who succeeds in anything, anywhere, I would say it's a large combination of luck and preparation. So you need the luck, but you also need to be prepared. You may need to be in the right place at the right time, but you need to know where that place is going to be so that when the right time comes, you're there. Luck was a huge part of it. I've been very lucky on Etsy in that I never had my shop randomly suspended for any reason. I never had, I don't sell any intellectual property infringing items, but I've never had any false IP reports against me or anything like that. My shop has never really had any major dings or anything. That was completely luck. But yeah, I do think having that mindset of just trying to be well set up for luck to find you is a good place to be.
I agree.
But yeah, as for the downsides, I do think never knowing how your sales are going to be the next day, it can take a toll. And so, one thing I do is really trying to be conscientious of saving as much money as I can, because it's, I think, more important for people who are in such a dynamic industry than even for most people. Like, we don't have to worry about being fired one day, right? But we could wake up and our Etsy shop was shut down for no reason or something. So I think it's more important for people like us than most people to have a runway set aside in case something were to happen. And so, that helps with that peace of mind, but it can be taxing, if you have a slow week of sales and having to wonder, well, is this it?
Yeah, where's that serotonin boost now, right?
Yeah, right.
Crazy. Yeah, and something to be said too, I think. So two things I wanted to touch on, but the preparedness with the financial kind of preparedness or saving for that rainy day or having, that cushion. Another thing with print on demand is that, there's a misconception that yes, while the barrier to entry is very low, especially it's not cost prohibitive per se, there are possibilities for new sellers out there that your store, well, it's almost inevitable, it seems like these days, that your store will get suspended without any reason. And that is ultimately according to Etsy because they want to vet you, right? And check out other things before they start paying. So you could be put into what's known as the reserves now, where they hold on to your money for a little while. So just make sure you have a little bit of a float. I would recommend probably $500 just to be safe to have. Not saying you'll need it, but in the event that you do, maybe even $100 or $200, so you can process a few orders still, because you're going to need to process those orders and pay for those orders to be processed before Etsy releases your funds. So just be conscious of that.
Well, I think that's a really good point about having the money set aside. And one thing that, anyone who can get a credit card, the credit card points alone are a huge perk of this kind of line of work. Like the way I see it, we don't get benefits, we don't get health insurance, we don't get a 401k match, but the credit card points are the sort of equivalent to all that. So anyone who is able to get a credit card that has a certain amount of cash back or even airline miles or something, that is not only a huge benefit, but also, if you do get put in reserve or if you do have a sudden spike in sales, that can absolutely be a lifesaver.
Smart. Yeah, good call. As a Canadian seller, I still pay everything in Printify, even though they've changed it now where you can have it in Canadian dollars. My account's still in US dollars, and I actually have a Canadian credit card. It's a Rogers MasterCard if anybody wants to know. It's the World Elite. This isn't no affiliate plug or anything like that, but it's regular 2 to 2.5% cash back on all purchases, but US purchases specific, so anything in US dollars, which works if you're traveling or doing anything, or using Printify, for example, where you want to load your wallet, they'll give 3% cash back on all US transactions. So like to your point, in Q4, that really starts to add up, right? Oh, and another little tip I wanted to share on that note too is that I would load your, either have it set to process X amount, like some people do, like on a daily, but I would just preload it one time, because if you're just letting it charge your card per transaction, like per sale, then you're going to be paying those credit card processing fees, which are usually like 3% or 2.5% plus 20 cents every single time, right? And you won't see that in Printify, but that'll be on your credit card and processing fees and stuff. So just mental note that I would probably preload a wallet. Do you do the same kind of thing, like you preload a set amount?
Yeah, that's actually a very good point. I found that out the hard way that September when I first had like a huge day of sales that was completely out of the blue compared to where it had been in the past. I discovered that if you put a certain amount of transactions on your credit card in one day, it won't let you do anymore.
Oh yeah, to flag it too. Forgot about that.
That's another. They may temporarily suspend your credit card or just say you can't do any more transactions today, and if you have a bunch more orders to process, there's going to be that delay. So yes, I do. I'm also a big proponent of preloading. I do it through PayPal onto Printify, and still through my credit cards, you're still getting the cash back and everything. But yes, that can be a very big lifesaver at certain times and just in general.
So another small perk for sure is the reward miles or the cash back, anything like that. Any other tips or even tools that you use for research or anything like that? I kind of talked about how they're not necessarily necessary when you're starting out, but are there any that you swear by, or do you just go with the Etsy search bar? It seems to be like that for me has always been kind of my go-to in a jam, because you can just start typing and what auto-populates is at least what's hot right now. Do you use any research tools like that? Because everybody's always, the biggest questions are like, how do you do research? How do you do news research, product research?
Right. Yeah, I would say I do agree that the Etsy search bar is underrated as a research tool, and especially because then you can click through and see what is selling well in, for those keywords, what styles are selling well for it. I think there is no substitute for looking at what is actually happening on Etsy and what people want, because just from the keywords alone, you can tell what people are searching for, but you can't tell what they're actually buying. But I do use eRank, and I'm a big fan of eRank. One thing that I actually use a lot, I didn't for a long time, but I do now, is they have a good competitor tracking tool where you can track your sales versus, I think I have the mid-tier eRank account now, so you can track up to 50 competitors, and that's actually really good for me for two things. First off, going back to the mental game, if you have a slow sales day, you can go go in and check, well, did everyone have a slow sales day? And sometimes they did. And you're like, okay, great. And other times they didn't. And that's when you really have to be like, okay, why did I, or, even a slow sales month compared to your competitors? Like, what are they doing that I'm not? Or, what am I doing that they're not? So yeah, that is very useful. And you can also see what is the most recent things that have sold in your competitors' shops. And so that's very useful to see not only who's selling a lot, but what are they selling. So again, I pride myself on not just copying other people's ideas, but it is, of course, you have to look at the landscape, what's out there, what people are buying, and learn from that. What do people want right now?
Yeah, that was something.
I swear by E-Rank.
Okay, well that's good to know. So that's like, you even use it for inspiration, it sounds like, too, right? So you'll see what's there, what's going on.
Yeah.
That was something we talked about even before we started getting on this call here, was that how, being unique and creating our own designs, because yourself, myself, Ed, and my wife Stacy too, we all do our own things, and we're all trying to fill gaps in the marketplace. Not just, I think at very least, you can at least put a new aesthetic or spin, design style on an existing design. There's also nothing wrong there, but I think the gold there is like trying to find what's missing, and in that comes being unique. It's cliche to say like, be unique and you'll make sales. Well, being unique doesn't mean like being completely out of left field either. It has to be warranted. You got to validate if there's any kind of demand to a degree, and you can do that by your competition. But just because nobody has sold a particular design or a certain quote, if you know your niche inside out, you're going to be up with all the lingo and the funny one-off inside jokes and stuff that's only relevant to that niche. Just because it's not on a shirt doesn't mean it won't sell, right? Is that a fair statement, you think?
Definitely. And I think especially once you start getting sales, especially if you're getting repeat customers and stuff like that, like once your shop has a little bit of traction, I think that's a really great opportunity to start putting out new things that aren't already out there. Because if people are already coming to your shop, looking around, it might not be something they would have ever thought to search for, but once they see it, they might really want it.
Yeah, you definitely want to have stuff in your shop. Like, I stress this when it comes to niching like that, because your passionate customers will return. They'll tell their friends, and you want them essentially to be able to leave with 2 or 3 things, or come back, on a weekly or bi-weekly basis and buy something else, right? So it's like, if you have stuff in that same vein, like, it's so much easier to have a repeat customer than it is to secure that first sale. Like, that's just proven. That's, mathematically proven business years over years. We're not the first people to say anything like that. So like, I don't understand sometimes when people just want to throw up 2,000 or 3,000 listings. Like, what are you doing? Like, 80% of which won't sell, right? The 80-20 rule.
Right.
It's mind-boggling to me. To that end, do you have thousands of listings? Do you need thousands of listings? What would you say to somebody who is putting up a ton of listings and maybe not seeing sales now that we're in Q4?
I would say, for me, I've always focused on more of the quality over quantity strategy. And even now, after almost 3 years, I think I have about 650 listings right now. So I definitely am not one of those people with 5,000 listings, but I will say, come to appreciate that strategy more over time, because as Etsy grows ever more competitive and you can't rely on one design to keep selling for you forever. Like, currently, I don't have one design that's far and away a bestseller. It's really more, I'll have a few at any time. Like right now, I'm still selling Halloween themed designs that are cross niche between Halloween and my niche. Yep. But I, for the most part, do rely on a wide range of different products selling. So I'm now trying to, have a good balance of quality and quantity. One thing that I'm working on a lot to help flesh out my store more and attract more customers is just putting the same designs I already have on different products. And I think that is a really important thing, because as we've talked about, having a good design really is the most important thing probably, and the most important reason someone's going to buy from you. So if you've invested all that time into making a great design, if you're just putting it on one product, you are, not getting nearly as much bang for your buck from that time you invested as if you put it on, I put mine on t-shirts, hoodies, sweatshirts. I do stick mostly to apparel, but, unisex tank tops, women's tank tops.
Yeah, you can find patterns in what's selling, right? And you can kind of identify, would this maybe translate to a tank top if it's mostly women buying, or you know what I mean? Like, you kind of start to see that. And I think that's a great point, because if you've nailed down your niche and you know it well, then you're putting up at that point good designs, or designs relevant that, what people want in that niche, then it only makes sense to put on products that would also be relevant to that niche, right? That's a smart point.
Definitely. And to your other question, what would I say to people putting up thousands of designs and not seeing sales? I would say before investing the time putting up thousands of designs, it does make a lot more sense to make sure you have a viable, maybe you need to really take an honest look at your designs and ask people for feedback on them, whether they actually are something people would want to wear. And, maybe are your mock-ups dialed in? Are your prices competitive? Because, if you're not getting any sales with 500 designs, if you keep doing more of the same thing, you're probably not going to be getting sales with 5,000 designs either.
A little bit of tough love there. It's a reality check, right? If you've done something that isn't working 500 times, why would you continue, right? 1,000 times another 1,500 is just more wasted work, I think, in that vein. So It's about, I would agree. It's about doing the right kind of work and making sure that the design is, I'd rather spend 2 days on a design, not saying that you should, but spend that long on a design, but I'd rather spend 2 days on a design and then put up 2 or 3 designs, new designs on a product a week than try to rush just to get 100 designs up. Like that inevitably lead to burnout, and the last thing you want is to end up burnt out in Q4 when we're not even there yet, right? And I'm seeing that all the time now, so that's kind of the heartbreaking part, right? If it's depressing, disheartening, and you're feeling overwhelmed and burnt out already, like just take a break. It's supposed to be fun in the beginning. It's not supposed to be mentally draining chore. It's okay to feel mentally drained with all the newness of it all, but it should be fun in the beginning, right? Like even, how we had mediocre success, the two of us, with our first, throwing up whatever we thought of on a shirt because we could. It was liberating in that creative sense, but it was also fun. Right? I hate that. It bothers me, and I feel sad for people. Like, I just want everyone to continue to have fun, right? And yes, it's easier said than done sometimes. But yeah, if it becomes like a chore, it's not, and too mentally taxing or even physically, if you're drained, if you're trying to, after hours, after your 9 to 5, trying to work another 5 hours just to throw stuff up, then just stop, take a break, go reassess, relax, clear your head. Life's too short to be stuck at that desk putting up stuff or misguided work, right? So yeah, great points all around. What's next for you? Right? Do you have anything that you're working on? What is your plan for the rest of Q4? Or are you just letting it ride right now because, what's done is done, and then what happens in 2024 for you?
I think my main plan is to keep branching out into more products. It's not really something I did a lot of initially. And so it is that, I do take pride in my designs. Like I said, I keep my designs relatively simple. It is not fine art by any stretch of the imagination, but I do really, putting my own style into them. And so I want to try and make the designs that I do have go farther, because I have been feeling the burnout on making new designs. So I'm, trying to take a break from that right now and put those designs on different products. And I've also been playing around quite a lot right now with Midjourney, making AI mock-ups, and even a little bit it's good for design inspiration, or I have started incorporating some small design elements from Midjourney. It can be difficult to get it to spit out something that's usable. I think a lot of people, are maybe putting either designs or mock-ups up there that are a bit questionable because, we have all seen the people with 6 fingers, or the designs that just don't, or, something that's just, even if it's just on a design, just looks not quite right about it, right? So it's a little, I'm still in the playing around with it phase, because I'm not quite sure that really it's entirely there yet to where, but I would like to start selling AI mock-ups. I think I'd like to get in on that game, because that is, the AI revolution is here, and it's
whether you like it or not,
get left behind. Right.
It's just like the internet, right? Back 20 plus years ago, right? Like you can either, get on top of it as an early adopter, or you can wish you had, right?
Exactly.
So many things like that. Like there's a lot of parallels there. We're doing the same. Like it's just a matter of time. We're dipping our toes in the AI thing too. I've been playing around with it because I'm trying to do things that are, again, I'm trying to identify gaps in the marketplace. I don't want to exactly divulge the niche related stuff in terms of the mock-ups, but a few of them are going to be relatively niche centric, a couple, 2-3 niches that I'm exploring with, and the results have been mostly good lately. I'm getting a lot better with the prompts, which is awesome, but it is work like anything else, but it's also the novelty, right? Like so many things for me have come out of POD, right? Not only like the opportunity to go to Riga, like Printify's HQ, which was, mind-blowing, but also like the tools. Like I've learned how to edit video now. I've learned how to, use different tools. I'm learning Midjourney. Like I love it all. And I feel like, I guess I get bored easily in the sense that I don't like only doing one thing at a time. And unfortunately, some people just call it neurodivergence. So like, I want to just try all of the things. I feel like life is, I want an 8th day in a week, and I want an extra hour in every day, and I want that 13th month at the end of the day. And life is short, right? And I just want to do all the things. So also know that, for some people that never runs out. But like you said, coming back from Riga was like so inspiring that I just feel like rejuvenated, recharged, in a ambitious sense. You said you felt inspired too, right? So like, in what way? Like, what is it that you're thinking bigger next time or now?
Well, I found something that worked for me, and I had just been doing more of the same. And so being around all, the best part of Riga for me was, meeting other people in the same space and seeing what everyone was doing. And it really just made me, it is a little overwhelming thinking of all the missed opportunities you're missing out on by not being in every space at once. And like you said, there are only so many hours in the day, and I've really been feeling that lately. But, one thing, I've never been into TikTok. I've never really used TikTok, but finding out at Amplified that TikTok is actively working on making, currently the biggest TikTok shop limiting factor is it has to ship within 2 or 3 days, right? But between Printify Express and TikTok being aware, actively wanting to partner with Printify, there's definitely going to be a huge opportunity there. It's still sort of in the working out the kinks phase, right? But that's something that I am knowing that I should really be getting on, and everyone watching this should probably be thinking about, because, as Etsy is what it is and continues to have more and more competition, again, it's the new, what can you do that's new? Well, the selling print on demand on TikTok shops, that will be new, and it will be a huge opportunity. So
yeah, can I just say that 2-day express delivery, Printify, game changer, and that's going to extend to more SKUs, which is hopefully the comfort colors, and that just, I guess, depends on inventory at printer level, but that is an absolute game changer. Like, no secret for a lot of people out there that I birthday stuff or event centric stuff has been my bread and butter. So to be able, and everybody always wants it. Can I have it by the end of the week? Can I have it? Like, I'm able to say yes now, right? And for a very minuscule increase, right? I think it was like going from like $475 to like $750, like 3.25 kind of thing, like increase. I'm like, this is nuts. But again, it's not extended to all SKUs yet, all different styles of garments. But I totally agree. My problem with the TikTok shop so far is that apparently it's only open to sellers in the States as far as North America goes.
Oh,
so
interesting.
I'm hoping there's like a loophole or caveat where if you're pushing from Printify to TikTok, maybe then it circumvents this map geolocation kind of thing. I'm not sure how that'll work. I don't know if it's like some governments have different, if it's a legal issue with, I don't know, the CRTC here, like privatizing things and data control. But yeah, hopefully that opens up to Canadians, and or at least we have the opportunity to use it through Printify, because I think that's a smart tip to be kind of, keep your finger on the pulse for that. I think that could be pretty massive, because it's like billions of people, right?
Yeah.
Literally. Yeah. So what's next? Like, keep your finger on the TikTok pulse then?
It's not, as a millennial, I feel loath to learn TikTok, but I think it's time. And, just looking at what other marketplaces are out there. I'm not at the starting my own standalone website point yet, but maybe at some point I have an Instagram for my Etsy shop that I kind of neglect. So, continuing to work on growing that, maybe neglecting that less, is also, just looking at different ways to hedge my bets, because so much of my strategy currently hinges on just, people typing in keywords into Etsy search, coming across my listings through that. And so I'm trying to branch out more into different ways of getting people to my Etsy shop, and of course, potentially different places to sell. So,
smart.
Yeah.
Any tips or advice for everybody? It sounds like don't have all your eggs in one basket would be one of them. Q4 tips that maybe they could implement, in the next couple of days.
I would say for right now is the time to really be focusing on, it's like the last time to focus on adding products for Q4, right? So one thing that I think is really helpful to keep in mind for that is what sells well for you normally may not be the same thing that sells well during Q4, because normally people are buying for themselves, and Q4 they're buying gifts. So especially if for people like us who sell apparel is not always the go-to gift because you don't know someone's size necessarily, you don't know their style. So for people who do sell apparel, now might be the time to quickly slap up some mugs, slap up some pillows, some tote bags, some journals. So I think that is a big thing right now for anyone who, we're recording this in October. It will probably go live soon, right? If you are not thinking about what to sell for Q4, you still have a little bit of time, but do it now.
For sure. Awesome. Yeah, so definitely go follow Sarah on Instagram. Again, it's at Sarah Blair POD. I'll link to it down in the description somewhere down there. Thanks so much, Sarah. This has been awesome. Looking forward to more chats, more of this. I wish we had more time to chat, in Latvia when we were there, but it was kind of like so much going on. And yeah, you're one of the ones that I wished I had more time with. So this is great that we're able to catch up here. So I appreciate you doing this. I know it's busy for everybody, but I appreciate you taking the time to chat with me today.
Well, likewise. Thank you so much for having me. It was really, really nice chatting.
Awesome. Thanks, Sarah. All right, take care, guys. We'll catch you in the next one.